Have you ever started a customer satisfaction survey, like clicking through those first few questions with every intention of being a totally helpful citizen, only to just,
Abandon it halfway through.
exactly, you abandoned it because it was confusing, or maybe it just felt like an endless slog. You're staring at the screen, your eyes glaze over, and you just instinctively close the tab.
Oh, yeah. We have all been there.
We really have. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the hidden architecture of quantitative research. We are taking a journey into how we actually know what we know about human behavior.
Right, which is a massive topic.
It is. And we are going to start from the incredibly messy, unpredictable art of asking people simple questions and trace that path all the way to how researchers design rigorous real-world experiments.
I love it.
By the end of this deep dive, you will never look at a survey or like a headline about a breakthrough scientific study the exact same way again. Okay, let's unpack this.
I think it's really important to validate your decision to abandon those surveys right out of the gate. I mean, measuring the real world, and especially measuring the internal landscape of human beings, is wildly complex.
Totally.
The rules and frameworks that researchers use to capture human data, they basically reflect this constant, agonizing tug of war. They are desperately trying to extract enough statistical information without, completely alienating the person they are studying.
Right, and before anyone can prove some grand theory about society, they need that raw data. And the most obvious way we get it is by just asking people questions.
Yeah, simple enough, right?
You'd think. But the sources revealed that just asking a question is a psychological minefield. Let's talk about the biological limits of human patience here.
Oh, this is fascinating.
The data is incredibly stark regarding how long you, me, or anyone is willing to sit there and serve as a data point.
The drop-off rates are just brutal. For online surveys, respondents start showing measurable signs of cognitive fatigue and routinely abandon the survey altogether after just 7 to 9 minutes.
Wow, 7 minutes.
Think about the implications of that timeline. You have less than 10 minutes before a participant's brain decides, like checking their phone is a much better use of calories.
Right. Though if they're sitting at a desktop computer, they're slightly more stationary, so you might squeeze, 12 minutes out of them?
Yeah, exactly. But anything creeping past 15 minutes crosses this physiological threshold. At that point, you essentially have to resort to behavioral bribes.
Like handing out gift cards, discount codes, entering them into a raffle, that kind of thing.
Yep, you have to pay them for their pain.
But time isn't even the biggest trap here. It's how the questions themselves are engineered. I mean, I see one specific phrasing trap out in the wild all the time, which is the dreaded double-barreled question.
Oh, the double-barreled question is the ultimate unforced error in survey design.
It really is.
This happens when a researcher poses a single question to a participant, but they subtly bake two completely independent concepts into that sentence, while only providing one scale for the answer.
Right, so imagine you're at a restaurant, you finish your meal, and the manager hands you a digital tablet that asks, how would you rate our food and our service today on a scale of 1 to 5?
Oh, sick mistake.
Right. Now imagine the food was absolutely spectacular, a 5-star, perfectly cooked meal. But your waiter disappeared for 40 minutes and then accidentally spilled ice water directly into your lap.
So the service was a 1.
Exactly. The service is a 1, food is a 5. How are you supposed to answer that single question? Do you, average the two experiences out to a 3? Do you prioritize the steak and give it a 4, or punish the waiter and give it a 2?
And the moment you are forced to mentally negotiate that compromise, the data is corrupted.
Completely.
When the researcher gets your response of a 3, they have zero visibility into your internal math. They cannot mathematically distinguish if a 3 means mediocre food and mediocre service, or world-class food and catastrophic service.
So the variable is just totally useless.
Completely useless. But, the minefield goes much deeper than clumsy grammar. The sequence of the questions itself actually alters reality due to a phenomenon called the context effect.
Okay, I have an analogy for this one. The context effect feels exactly like a first date.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you sit down for coffee and your opening line is a heavy, emotionally charged political debate, it irrevocably changes the atmosphere of that encounter.
Oh, absolutely. It sets a mood.
Right. Even if you quickly pivot to asking about their favorite movies or where they grew up, that initial heavy question has primed the environment. Every subsequent answer is colored by that first impression.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
But I have to push back a little bit here. So what does this all mean? Does this imply that literally every survey ever created is fundamentally biased just by the order of its questions.
What's fascinating here is that you are pointing out the exact vulnerability that forces survey methodology to be a rigorous science, rather than just a casual administrative task. Because yes, sequential bias is an omnipresent threat. When you ask a participant a question about a sensitive topic, say the economy, you activate a specific neural network. You pull their financial anxieties into their working memory.
Oh, I see.
If the very next question asks them to rate their overall life satisfaction, that answer will be artificially depressed because their brain is currently bathed in the stress of the previous question.
Which means the researcher isn't measuring their true baseline happiness. They are just measuring the echo of their own previous question.
Precisely. And to dismantle that echo, modern survey platforms use strict algorithmic randomization.
Just scrambling the order.
Exactly. By scrambling the order of questions for every single participant, the context effect is dispersed across the entire sample as random noise, rather than, skewing the final data set in one concentrated direction.
So every word, every sequence, every blank space is just heavily engineered.
It has to be.
But if writing a good survey requires this agonizing level of linguistic perfection and psychological strategy, how does any research actually get funded or finished? I mean, deploying thousands of these surveys sounds paralyzingly expensive.
Well, a lot of the time, researchers simply don't write them.
Really?
Yeah. Instead of trying to invent a flawless survey from scratch, they act as data scavengers. They utilize a method known as secondary analysis.
So just using data someone else already collected.
Right. We are currently living in an era of unprecedented data proliferation. There are massive, highly engineered data sets available to the public, such as the U.S. Census, the General Social Survey, or the European Social Survey.
Right. These are longitudinal databases containing decades of behavioral and demographic tracking, and they're funded by major organizations.
Exactly. But to legally and safely use this data, all of it has to be completely de-identified. Before anyone can download a spreadsheet, all the names, addresses, and individual markers are scrubbed.
So the researcher's just staring at millions of raw numbers.
Just a wall of integers, which introduces the single most critical tool in secondary analysis, the codebook.
Ah, the codebook.
When you open one of these massive databases, you do not see friendly, readable column headers like annual income or general happiness. You see thousands of columns with cryptic variable names like VAR 405.
Right, so the codebook is kind of like the Rosetta Stone.
That's exactly what it is. It is the technical documentation that translates those integers back into human meaning. It tells the researcher the exact phrasing of the original question, the sample size, and crucially, how the original team handled missing data.
Oh, missing data is a massive trap, isn't it? I kind of think of secondary analysis like buying a highly complex piece of used industrial machinery.
Okay, I like that.
The raw data set is the machine itself. It has immense horsepower, but the code book is the instruction manual. If you don't read the manual, you are just pushing buttons in the dark.
And pushing buttons in the dark can destroy your entire study. Let's look at how missing data is coded, for example. Often, if a participant skips a question about their age, the original researchers might plug in the number 99 or 999 as a placeholder just to tell the computer the data is missing.
Oh, no. So if a secondary researcher doesn't read the code book and they just run a statistical average on that column,
they're going to conclude the average age of their population is somewhere around 85.
just because they factored a bunch of 999 placeholders into their math.
Exactly.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. If you're scavenging someone else's data, aren't you also inheriting all of their badly phrased questions? Like you didn't write them.
Yep.
If they used a double-barreled question or they failed to randomize their sequences to prevent the context effect, you are stuck with their flawed architecture.
You inherit their brilliance, and you are absolutely burdened by their blind spots. Secondary researchers cannot simply download a CSV file and start generating charts.
It takes work.
It takes weeks, sometimes months, just cleaning the data. They have to forensically review the original survey instruments. They must scrutinize the exact wording of the questions asked in, 1995, and determine if those questions actually map onto their current research goals.
And if a variable is tainted by a double-barreled structure.
The modern researcher might have to discard that variable entirely.
Wow, it is literal detective work. But let's take a step back from surveys entirely. We use surveys and historical data sets to spot trends. We can look at the numbers and see a correlation between, say, a person's level of education and their voting habits.
Right.
But a trend is just a shadow on the wall. It doesn't prove why the shadow is moving. If we want to move from correlation to causation to definitively prove that variable A forces variable B to happen, asking questions is no longer enough. We have to actively manipulate reality.
We need an experiment.
We have to build an experiment.
Moving from observation to manipulation is the pivotal shift in the scientific method. The foundational logic of experimental design is to isolate a single variable, neutralize all surrounding noise, and measure the resulting disruption.
So how do they map that out?
In research methodology, there is a very clean shorthand used to map out these designs. R stands for random assignment, O stands for observation, and X represents the treatment, the thing we are actively injecting into the environment.
R, O, and X. Okay, let's ground this in reality with a classic study from the sources. This is about the false consensus effect, conducted by Ross at Stanford back in 1977.
Oh, this is a great one.
It beautifully illustrates how an experiment forces human nature out into the open in a way a survey never could.
The mechanics of this study are just brilliant. The researchers took a pool of undergraduate students and presented them with a highly unusual behavioral request.
Right, they asked these students to walk around the university campus for 30 minutes, wearing a giant sandwich board that just said, "Eat at Joe's."
A totally absurd, slightly embarrassing task.
Completely. And the students were given a binary choice. Yes, I will wear the sign, or no, I refuse. But the true manipulation of the experiment happened right after they made their choice.
Exactly.
The researchers then asked the students to estimate what percentage of their peers would make the exact same decision.
And the resulting data exposes a massive cognitive bias. The students who agreed to wear the sandwich board estimated that over 60% of other people would also agree to wear it.
But the ones who said no.
Conversely, the students who refused the task were absolutely convinced that the vast majority of their peers would also refuse.
Because we project our own internal reality onto the rest of the world. It is the false consensus effect. If I'm willing to do something, I assume it's a perfectly normal baseline behavior, and everyone else will too.
And if you think it's humiliating,
I assume everyone else shares my exact boundary.
all right.
That is the power of a controlled experiment. But, when we look at classic experimental designs, there is a massive structural flaw when we try to measure how much a person grows or changes. And that flaw is called pretest sensitization.
Pretest sensitization creates a frustrating loop for researchers. I mean, the classic structure of an experiment is straightforward. You observe the participant to establish a baseline pretest. Then you apply the treatment. Finally, you observe them again the post-test to measure the difference.
Makes total sense.
The problem arises when the mere act of administering the pretest fundamentally alters the participant's psychology before the treatment even begins.
Yeah.
The measurement device itself becomes a contaminating variable.
Okay, let's bring this into daily life. Imagine you're trying to test the efficacy of a new appetite-suppressing diet pill. The treatment is the pill, and the post-test is measuring how many calories you consume at an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Okay, I'm with you.
Right before you walk into the buffet, the researchers make you strip down to your underwear and stand on a highly illuminated scale in the middle of the room to get your baseline weight.
Yeah.
That is the pretest. Just stepping on that public scale is going to make you acutely self-conscious about your body. So you walk into the buffet and you eat a salad instead of a burger.
Right.
But you didn't eat the salad because the diet pill worked. You ate the salad because the pretest completely sensitized your behavior.
That is a visceral, highly accurate analogy. The pretest pollutes the baseline, and it happens constantly in educational and psychological settings.
Like where?
Well, if you give a group of employees a pretest assessing their unconscious biases, you immediately signal to them that their biases are under a microscope.
Right, they know what's coming.
Exactly. They will instinctively alter their behavior during the subsequent corporate training, not because the training was effective, but because the pretest put them on high alert.
Okay. I am going to challenge you here because this sounds like a fatal flaw in the scientific method.
Yeah.
If pretests ruin the experiment by sensitizing the participant, why not just drop the pretest entirely? Just give them the treatment and measure them at the end.
Because if you drop the pretest entirely, you have zero evidence that your treatment did anything.
Oh.
Yeah. Without a baseline, you don't know if your participants improved or if they were just already high performers before they even walked into your lab. You are flying completely blind.
So we absolutely need a baseline to measure change, but measuring the baseline destroys the validity of the change. How on earth do researchers solve an impossible paradox like that?
They solve it with algebra. specifically a framework known as the Solomon Randomized Four-Group Design.
Solomon four-group design.
It is one of the most elegant, mathematically bulletproof solutions in quantitative research. Instead of simply splitting participants into one treatment group and one control group, the researcher randomly divides the population into four distinct quadrants.
Walk us through the mechanics of how this matrix actually isolates the variables.
Okay, group 1 is your standard experimental setup. They receive the pretest, the treatment, and the post-test. Group 2 is your standard control. They receive the pretest, they sit in a room with no treatment, and they take the post-test.
Got it.
Now, here is where the math solves the paradox. Group 3 receives the treatment and the post-test, but they are never given a pretest.
Oh.
And Group 4 receives absolutely nothing. No pretest, no treatment, only the final post-test.
So you have basically created permutations of groups with and without the pretest and groups with and without the treatment. How does that actually give you the answer?
By comparing the final post-test scores of these four groups, you can mathematically separate the overlapping variables. If you want to know the pure, uncontaminated effect of your treatment, you look at Group 3, who got the treatment but no pretest, and you subtract the score of Group 4, who got nothing at all. The difference between those two numbers is the exact isolated power of your treatment.
Because neither of them took the pretest sensitization is entirely removed from the equation.
Exactly. And if you want to measure just how badly the pretest messes with people's heads, you subtract Group 4 from Group 2. The Solomon design doesn't just prevent sensitization, it actively quantifies it.
It is basically a psychological Sudoku puzzle.
It really is.
But building a four-group matrix requires a massive pool of participants, extreme logistical control, and the ability to randomly assign people into highly restricted environments. It is a masterpiece for a sterile laboratory.
Yes, a laboratory.
But human reality does not happen in a lab. What happens when randomly tossing people into four distinct buckets is physically or logistically impossible.
This raises an important question, and it transitions us into the reality of field research, quasi-experimental designs.
Quasi-experiments.
Yeah, quasi essentially translates to almost. These are frameworks deployed in the wild. When a researcher cannot achieve perfect random assignment, but still desperately needs to extract cause and effect data from chaotic environments, they rely on quasi-experiments.
Right, from the sources we're talking about design for in the methodology frameworks in non-equivalent control group, this is what you use when you are dealing with intact populations that you cannot scramble up. Like, think about a hospital setting.
Perfect example. If a hospital administrator wants to test a radical new patient care protocol, they cannot walk into the building and randomly assign half the patients on the floor to the new protocol and leave the other half on the old protocol.
The nurses would riot.
Oh, absolutely. And the logistical cross-contamination would ruin the data anyway. So they use a non-equivalent control group. They take Hospital A and implement the new protocol across the entire building. Then they find Hospital B across town, leave its procedures alone, and measure the patient satisfaction at both locations over time.
And the control group is non-equivalent because the demographic makeup of Hospital B might be slightly older or wealthier than Hospital A. It's not a perfectly randomized sample, so confounding variables exist, but it is the strongest possible design for that real-world limitation. Now, Design 5 is where the methodology gets truly creative. It is called the Equivalent Time Samples Design, commonly referred to as an ABA design.
The ABA design completely bypasses the need for a control group.
Which is wild.
It is. Instead of comparing two different populations, the researcher uses one single group of people as their own control by rapidly alternating the presence of the treatment. The A phase represents the baseline, where no treatment is applied. The B phase is when the treatment is turned on.
A great example of this happens in classrooms. Imagine a teacher dealing with a student who exhibits constant out-of-seat behavior. The kid is just sprinting around the room.
We all know that kid.
Right. During the first A phase, the teacher does nothing but observe and record the baseline frequency of the behavior. The next week, they enter the B phase. The teacher introduces a targeted behavioral treatment, like specific verbal praise every time the child remains seated.
And suddenly, the out-of-seat behavior drops dramatically.
But the teacher cannot declare victory yet. The improvement might just be a coincidence. The child might have just been tired that week.
Right. To prove causation, the researcher must deliberately break the peace. They must return to phase A and ruthlessly withhold the verbal praise.
Which feels entirely counterintuitive when you finally got the kid to sit down. But if the kid immediately goes back to sprinting around the room when the praise stops, you have isolated the variable. You turn the praise back on for the final B phase to restore order, and you have proven cause and effect.
Precisely.
This AB design is essentially just the scientific term for modern parenting. You test a new bedtime routine, the treatment, and see if the toddler sleeps through the night. Then, you get lazy on a Friday and skip the routine. If total chaos returns to your house at 2 a.m., you have successfully run an A/B trial in your living room.
That's exactly it. You are actively manipulating environmental variables to isolate behavioral outcomes. But, there is a very hard boundary to the equivalent time samples design.
Wait, but what if the treatment is something you physically cannot undo? Like teaching someone a math concept. You can't just turn off their new knowledge like a light switch. Say you are a teacher testing a revolutionary new way to teach long division. You measure the baseline, you teach them the concept, their math scores skyrocket. You cannot transition back to the A phase.
Right. You can't force them to unlearn it.
Exactly. Does this ABA design just fall apart?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you've identified the exact dividing line between state changes and trait changes.
Okay.
Yes, the ABA design collapses completely if the treatment causes a permanent cognitive or physiological alteration. It is strictly reserved for temporary interventions like verbal praise, environmental noise, or perhaps a temporary medication where the biological half-life guarantees the effect will eventually wear off.
So it is a constant shifting puzzle. Researchers have to continually match the rigid mathematics of their design to the irreversible, messy reality of human growth.
And that is the true art of quantitative research. Knowing when a simple survey is sufficient, knowing when to dig through the code books of secondary data, knowing how to execute a pristine Solomon four-group matrix in a laboratory, and, well, knowing when you have to embrace the chaos of a quasi-experiment. Every single method carries inherent blind spots.
What an incredible intellectual journey we've been on today. We started by exploring the biological and psychological traps of a 9-minute survey, revealing how the context effect can literally rewire a participant's memory retrieval.
Yeah.
We deciphered the cryptic architecture of secondary data code books to avoid the traps of missing variables. And we explored how ingenious researchers isolate cause and effect, using the algebra of the Solomon designs to neutralize pretest sensitization and deploying ABI models to find truth in the chaos of a classroom.
It really changes how you process the numbers you see on the news every day.
It absolutely does. So the next time you're sitting at your laptop trying to fill out a customer survey, and you notice the progress bar dragging past that 10-minute mark, you now know exactly why your brain is screaming at you to close the tab.
It's not just you.
Right. You aren't just being impatient. You are experiencing measurable cognitive fatigue, exactly as the methodology predicted.
I want to leave you with one final conceptual puzzle to mull over. We've spent this time mapping out all the ways human behavior resists being measured by the sequential bias of questions, by the very act of administering a pretest, or by the sheer impossibility of random assignment in everyday life. Given all these layers of contamination, is it ever truly possible to measure human behavior with 100% objectivity? Or in the social sciences, is the researcher always destined to become an active ingredient in their own experiment, forever altering the humanity they're trying to observe?
Wow. That is a profound question to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the data around you. Keep looking for those double-barreled questions out in the wild, and we will catch you next time.